Now we come to the 5th verse, which is to accept such loss as being blamed, without trying to defend yourself.
At the beginning of each verse, we find one line, which has been written by Geshe Tangpa, which actually sums up...
himself, the author.
It actually sums up the whole theme and main point of the actual verse. And here, the 5th verse, the theme is, accept such loss as being blamed without trying to defend yourself.
Now, the 3 different translations. The first is, when others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer to others the victory. Another translation is, whenever others, due to their jealousy, revile and treat me in other unjust ways, may I accept this defeat myself and offer the victory to others. But you read the provisional. We brought the 2 together and made a provisional translation.
Whenever someone out of envy does me wrong by attacking or belittling me, I will take defeat upon myself and give the victory to others.
In Tibetan, Dala yenji tado ki hirkula su mripe chonka rang lembatan jarka yelambuwa hyo. When others out of jealousy, that's correct. Whenever others due to the jealousy, that's also fine. Whenever someone out of envy, that's good. Shekula su mripe chonka rang lembatan jarka yendu mbuwa hyo. And does me wrong by attacking, belittling me, I will take defeat upon myself and give the victory to others. That's good too. I think all the translations look good. It seem to be able to bring it out. All of them. Whenever others due to their jealousy revile and treat me in other unjust ways, may I accept the defeat myself and offer the victory to others. Or when others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander and scorn, may I take upon myself and the defeat and offer to others the victory. In fact, it's good to have all the 3 translations, It's good because then you can get a different sense from each, We can say, this is the key, Patrick.
This is the key verse.
I don't pronounce the verse so well, so this is the key
verse
in the 8
verses
for the training of the mind, very much. Now this
verse
is about what to do when others mistreat you out of jealousy. Or to be attacked means to be criticized harshly. To be belittled means to be put down. There are many other kinds of harmful things as well, much worse things that other people can do to us also.
Normally, in such circumstances, we feel the need to defend ourselves, to justify what we've done, and to clarify matters by either protesting our innocence or, if a mistake was made, by explaining why. From a conventional point of view, this is perfectly acceptable if it's done without anger or resentment. However, the instructions for training our mind, or lojong, do not permit this approach. As sincere practitioners...
Now, I think it's kind of when you say, the lojong do not permit this, it's like there's a kind of like a rule or something. And I think that sometimes, people in the West have an idea of a big brother or some kind of a rule or some kind. I think it's very important. Buddhism is not like that. Okay, so that particular point, and from a conventional point of view, this is perfectly acceptable if it's done without anger. But however, instruction from the Attaining mind, lojong, do not permit this approach, or you can say, and from training of mind, this is not the way. As sincere
practitioners of Lojong, whose
It's
aim
the training of the mind, you see, whose aim
is to attain enlightenment for the sake of all living beings, you should remain gentle, calm, and forbearing in the face of criticism, insults, disparagement, and accusations, whether they are true or false.
as I mentioned to you yesterday, these are all different pieces, different points that are presented by different masters, commentaries on them.
Geshe Chekawa says, instead of harboring resentment, respond with a gentle mind. Without any resentment, refrain from claiming, for instance, I'm innocent, others are to be blamed. There is no need to embark on lengthy explanations. Simply accept defeat. Others behave harmfully because they want something. Therefore, we should ensure that they experience satisfaction.
Give them the satisfaction. Give victory to others. Take the loss upon ourselves. Incredible the principle of this. In fact, if you really realize when you can do this, what an incredible opportunity this offers in terms of really your spiritual accomplishment, you know. And then when you're really able to do that, you're a Bodhisattva, you know. You're a noble one. You're worthy of true respect. You understand? And also, I think sometimes you see in this world, you know, when we just kind of, when it's like an eye for an eye, like that, when we go that way, then it's just all the, they just perpetuate, I think sometimes if you really can follow this way, it's really a way of bringing about a change in the world also. If there are beings like this, who practice this way, genuinely, strongly, can make an incredible can really even transform the enemy also. If someone, others out of jealous treat wrongly and abuse, slander, scorn, and then if you may take upon myself the defeat and offer the victory to others, and if you're really able to do that in a really, in a deep way, sometimes it can be that, the other person will realize something. Do you know what I'm saying? But even if other person doesn't realize it, it's not like saying, I have the last word on it. You know what I mean? It's like that. When I give the profit, give the victory to others, take the loss upon self, then I realize how this other person is going to realize how great I am. So that I have the last say, and I will be the victorious ultimately. So you kind of gloat in that idea of how, you imagine how your enemy is going to come and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I realize how great, noble one you are. You can go through scenarios like that in your mind, that you're this great practitioner of compassion, but maybe the truth is you cannot respond at all to begin with anyway. So there is no option but that you have to give profit to the others, loss upon yourself anyway. And particularly if that's the situation, it's best to adopt this attitude, pretending that you're giving the profit to others and taking the loss upon yourself, because, you understand? But that there's another angle on this point. But that when you really can do that, and really have the kind of the dignity and have the really, the integrity of the bodhicitta, and really encounter that, the person in that way, it can really, it would be amazing.
Geshe Tangpa said that no matter what profound texts he read, their main message for him was that other living beings possess all good qualities and that he himself was at fault.
You find later in the teachings it showed that, some of these kind of practices are really more advanced for someone who's already advanced in their understanding. and in their development can do that. Because, for example, when you say, like, all beings possess good qualities, but, he himself was at fault always. You see, the Geshe Chekawa, this great master, said that no matter what profound text he read, the main message for him was that all other beings possess good qualities, that he himself was at fault. He was not kind of neurotic, or, like sometimes people think, I am the terrible, I am the worst, that kind of a self-hatred. Or you see, there's one way of belittling oneself which is not really healthy, which is way of sometimes when you're, that's not what we're talking about here. It's very important, you understand? And we've emphasized this time and time again, when you say, the self-cherishing, like in these teachings, is not something that is, how do you say, self-cherishing is seen as something negative. And then people might take that as saying that one should not love oneself, take care of oneself. It's not saying that. In fact, all this practice starts from a sense of a very healthy ego. Healthy in a sense of, so healthy that it's egoless. From Buddhist point of view, really, the very healthy ego is the egoless ego. Egoless. You understand? And when you have really such a strong sense of really grounded, and so that you can have the courage, the humility to consider all other beings possess good qualities, and then you yourself at fault, meaning you always, like how do you say, belittle yourself, not in a negative way, but in a really, with the humility, and that's really a great quality. This, I think, the point is that he is not, how do you say, belittling yourself.
This is related to what is called the 4 virtuous practices of a Bodhisattva, which are not responding with anger to those who are angry at you, not retaliating when beaten, not scolding in return when you are scolded, and not exposing the hidden faults of somebody who exposes your own hidden faults. Geshe Tangpa also said that when he saw others in conflict or harming one another, he had trained himself to feel responsible for their actions. Another Kadampa master said that if you think you've found anything more profound to practice than this, you can be sure that you've made a mistake.
The last 2 lines of this verse are truly very profound, you see. Give all profit and gain to others, take the loss and defeat on yourself.
Giving profit to others and accepting loss is the ultimate example of the abandoning of self-cherishing. This is it, the summit of achievement. Why? Because it means that we've defeated our greatest enemy and obstacle, ego and self-grasping. And in the long run, we will be victorious, because we will attain enlightenment. So when, out of strong envy, someone insults you, or directly or indirectly, treats you badly or attacks you, and so causes you pain, you will take this defeat or loss upon yourself, thinking, whatever's happened must be my own fault. I was the one who committed all sorts of non-virtuous actions during my past lives. And as a result of that, I am now mistreated and abused. So now I am clearing up my karmic debt. How wonderful.
So that you see, instead of maybe you might not be, how do you say, you're really wrongly accused. And so perhaps very unjustly, so done. But you see, even if you know that, you see, you don't look at, say, how unjust it is and get extremely angry and, but you consider, start thinking that perhaps something that you've done in the past, a negative karma, that as a result of that, you've been accused this way. Sometimes, particularly when no reason if somebody just accuses you. I mean, the amazing thing is there are many, many masters. I remember there are some really the great Tibetan masters who actually practice even to this day. when someone accuses you or wrong, never ever retaliate and never ever defend.
The Zen master Hakuin was praised by his neighbours as one who lived a pure life. Close to his house lived a beautiful Japanese girl whose parents owned a food store. Suddenly, without any warning, her parents discovered she was expecting a child. This made them extremely angry. She wouldn't confess who the man was, but after much harassment, she at last named Hakuin. In great anger, the parents went to the master. They shouted and accused him. "Is that so?" was all he would say.
He just said, "Is that so?" That's the only thing he would say.
After the child was born, it was brought to Hakuin. By this time, he'd lost his reputation, which didn't trouble him
At all.
But he took very good care of the child. He got milk from his neighbours and everything else the little one needed. A year later, the girl could stand it no longer.
The girl, she was really now troubled by her conscience because she actually lied.
She told her parents the truth, that the real father of the child was a young man who worked in the fish market. The mother and father of the girl at once went to Hakuin to ask his forgiveness, to apologize at length, and to get the child back.
Hakuin listened in silence, and as he gave them back the child, all that he said was, "Is that so?" Simply. Completely unperturbed by whatever. There's also a story of Buddha also.
There are some illustrations from the life of Buddha. Before he attained enlightenment, he abandoned the role of universal ruler as if it were straw and lived by the river Naranjana without a care for the harshness of the austerities he was practicing. What he showed was that in order to accomplish our own ultimate benefit, the nectar of realization, we must have mastered the one taste of happiness and suffering. Then, after he attained enlightenment, the chiefs of humans and gods, as far as the highest realms, showed him the greatest reverence, placing his feet on the crown of their heads and offering to serve and honor him with everything he might need. However, a Brahmin called Bharadvaja abused him and criticized him 100 times. The impudent daughter of another Brahmin accused him of sexual misconduct. And he lived off rotten horse fodder for 3 months in the land of King Agninatha, and so on. But he remained without the slightest fluctuation in his mind, neither elated nor downcast, like Mount Meru, the king of mountains, unshaken by the wind.
When you offered the highest riches, adoration, that didn't go to his head. When somebody also accused you, that didn't go, to remain completely. And so that you see that this way of not responding, this is really, it's quite extraordinary, really. But of course, one must be a great practitioner, really, to be able to do this.
The purification and merit that result from offering others the victory and accepting defeat is much more powerful than that created by any other means. But if we do this, will we become weak and downtrodden? Actually,
it's the opposite will happen. Each time we are able to offer, you see, if we do this, then will we become weak and downtrodden? Will we be the loser, in a sense, what I'm saying? Actually, the opposite will happen. Each time we are able to offer the victory to others, we will grow stronger. By remaining calm and kind and not getting angry, we purify negative actions and create tremendous merit, which ultimately is the greatest benefit to us. But it will only happen if there is no trace of self-interest in our actions. The great benefit of practicing this way, that's another commentary too. The great benefit of practicing this way is that it purifies you of many negative deeds and helps you to accumulate a lot of virtue. The greatness of the virtue is related to your motivation. Whether how great your virtue is really depend upon your motivation. And as you practice this instruction, you can remember the Shantideva's word. There is no evil like anger, there is no virtue like patience.
Or you can say there's no austerity like patience, because the saints of the past, like Milarepa, used to practice austerity or penance as a way of purifying. That's why the notion of sacrifice is very important, because these days people just want to feel good, and even when it comes to practice, they just want to do what makes them feel good, what's comfortable for them, and not what's challenging.
But of course, sometimes again you can be like a masochistic, you do only thing that's painful. I'm not saying that, but really the sense of sacrifice, penance is something very important. That if you look at the life of all the great masters, that there is a tremendous sacrifice they made, tremendous penance they did in order to purify. Even though maybe they did not need to do, like in the case of Buddha. He had already in some ways enlightened already. According to some approach, there are two different approaches. The ordinary approach of viewing the Buddha's life, where you see the Buddha's life as, Prince Gautama Siddhartha as being the kind of like, and then he became enlightened in Buddha and so on, as actually something real that happened. But according to Mahayana and other traditions, that actually Buddha had already attained enlightenment. This life was just an enactment, showing. You understand? That, for example, when he was born as a king, and it was foretold that by the astrologers and by the sages, saying that he will either become a universal monarch, or else he will become someone who will find the light of the world, who will become enlightened, will be. In fact, the sage, they kind of wept, saying that I will not live long to see, And of course, king being a worldly king wanted to really make sure that he remains a king and become powerful. So it kept, the cordon of the whole area of the palace, and so that he was not seeing any kind of suffering or any misery, but only pleasure, happiness, music, But even then, he didn't really, none of these luxury, because I think luxury in those days was perhaps even greater than luxury now. And that he didn't really find satisfaction, didn't find really meaning. He was always very contemplative, always, you see. And then at the end of it, and then one day he managed to escape with the chariot, and then saw the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness and death. And so also a hermit or a kind of a renunciate, a monk who was, who was such at peace, and that really impressed him. And then he said that he is the one who's really renounced the world and seek to find an answer to, So then he vowed to, for the benefit for himself and for the benefit of all beings too. So he left the kingdom, he escaped, he renounced all this thing, and then took to really extreme asceticism. What?
Asceticism.
Like he ate only 1 grain of rice, because in those days in Hinduism there was the ascetics. It was a very important thing, And then 1 grain of rice, and then 1 drop of water every day, and then you can see that there's a Gandhara school of art, which is the school of art that's influenced by Greeks, I think, isn't it? And they have this image of this Buddha. You find them in Lahore, I think in the museum in Lahore in Pakistan. And there's an image of Buddha, some of you have seen, where he was really completely like just bone and skins, Really, you can see all his veins. His old Dalai Lama find that image extremely inspiring. He's the most inspiring image of Buddha for him. That he's very complete. But he found also that was again, of course he took to that, but then he also renounced that, the extreme that, he took the middle way.
We tend to try and avoid kind of challenge because we're so simply focused on ourselves. But when we do focus on ourselves, it's not so much on our long-term benefit, but more on our habits, our likes and dislikes. So in the end, we don't really take care of ourselves, but we end up the losers. So the idea of sacrifice is not really there. Of course, when we say sacrifice, we don't mean being a martyr or doing something which is psychologically unhealthy, but with a really pure motivation. For example, if you undertake a retreat, you don't expect it all to be very pleasant. There's going to be hard work involved because you've got a lot to purify. According to the Mahayana teachings,
that means the teachings of the Bodhisattva vehicle, teachings on compassion. You see, the teaching like this Bodhicitta teachings come from that particular teaching, is that tradition is that of that particular vehicle teaching called Mahayana.
Whenever there is a choice between ourselves and others,
we must put others first. Whenever there is a choice between present pleasure and ultimate well-being, we must put ultimate well-being first. Dalai Lama often says, which is actually, in some ways, what his Holiness Dalai Lama says, not just his sayings, but that come from this teaching, which says, do not sacrifice your long-term benefit with short-term pleasure.
So what is being talked about here is a mental attitude, this mental attitude of bodhicitta. And if you have this attitude, the attitude itself gives you courage, gives you capacity, so that you can actually cope.
Like sometimes if we limit ourselves and really think that, I'm not able to do, I think sometimes then your whole capacity, even your body will also.
This verse played a pivotal role in the lineage of compassion training.
Yeah, this is from Tibetan Book of Living Dying, yeah?
Clearly, one of the greatest masters of Tonglen in Tibet was Geshe Chekawa, who lived in the 11th century.
This is on page 197 till 199.
Geshe Chekawa was extremely learned and accomplished in many different forms of meditation. But one day, when he happened to be in his teacher's room, he came across a book lying open at these following lines: "Give all profit and gain to others, take all loss and defeat upon yourself." The vast and almost unimaginable compassion of these lines astounded him, and he set out to find the master who had written them. One day on his journey he met a leper who told him that his master, Geshe Langri had died. But Geshe Chekawa...
By the way, Geshe Langri is the author of this 8 verse of training of the mind. You got it?
But Geshe Chekawa persevered, and his long efforts were rewarded when he found the dead master's principal disciple, Geshe Chekawa. Geshe Chekawa asked this disciple, "Just how important do you think the teachings contained in these two lines are?" The disciple replied, "Whether you like it or not, you'll have to practice this teaching if you truly wish to attain Buddhahood."
Meaning disciple of Geshe Langri. And he was also a great master called Geshe Chekawa. Yeah.
This reply astonished Geshe Chekawa almost as much as his first reading of the 2 lines. And
the reply was, whether you like it or not, you will have to practice this teaching if you truly wish to attain Buddhahood, enlightenment.
And Geshe Chekawa stayed with this disciple of Geshe Langri Tangpa for 12 years to study this teaching and to take to heart the practice of Tonglen, which is its practical application. During that time, Geshe Chekawa had to face many different kinds of ordeals, all sorts of difficulties, criticism, hardships and abuse.
You always think abuse and these things are something bad. But for a true practitioner who has really conquered himself, that whatever harm comes to them, everything is a source of benefit. They grow stronger and better by, That is when they conquer the ego. or it's in the whole process of conquering the ego. But that, in order to do that, you have to be quite strong in yourself. Meaning, you have to be confident in yourself. In some ways, have to really, I think in the Western sense, it's important that you really know how to love yourself, in touch with yourself, confident in yourself, so that you're humble. It is people display pride and all this when they're not so confident. Pride and arrogance are sense that they're not confident. Real confidence comes when you're humble.
For Geshe Chekawa, the teaching was so effective and his perseverance in its practice so intense that after 6 years he had completely eradicated any self-grasping and self-cherishing.
Then he became such an extraordinary master. He was the one who then gave a whole, the teaching on the Lojong, training of the mind. He started 8 verses of the training of the mind was the root source. And then comes the major, called the 7 points of mind training by Geshe Chekawa. Anyway, this about the Geshe Chekawa and the story of his life and things are mentioned, in the chapter 12 in the Tibetan Book of Living Dying. And there, when you really practice, taking the loss upon yourself, giving profit to others, or like, for example, little come now here, you see the practice of Tonglen, when you take with compassion the suffering and pain of others, and then you give your wellness and happiness to others through love. By practicing that, many lepers in Tibet, during that time there was a leprosy epidemic. Many lepers, by practicing, taking out on the suffering and illness for others, really, and giving their wellness and happiness and healing to others through love, they themselves were healed. Which means that, you see, normally you think if you take the illness of others, you will become more and more sick, but actually the opposite happened. They got healed.
Geshe Chekawa says that this 5th verse represents the patience of being unperturbed by harm, whereas the next verse, the 6th one, is the patience of voluntarily accepting suffering.
See, why we take Geshe? Because even in commentaries, it's very important to take whose commentaries. You can take commentaries for 2 reasons.
You could refer to a commentary because it's a commentary that comes through the lineage and the tradition.
Yeah, for example, like you see, Geshe Rinpoche was this great master from whom the teaching of the 8 words of training of mind came. And then later it was Geshe Chekawa, who through the disciple of Geshe Rinpoche, really received it directly. He became the main holder of this, and as such he really transmitted this extraordinary teaching and developed this teaching called 7 points of mind training. So therefore, Geshe Chekawa's commentary on the 8 verses is especially respected for its, it's like, you understand? At the same time, what I'm saying, the other point, Patrick?
The other point is that the commentary of the teacher in itself, for its own virtues, may be especially brilliant or clear in clarifying the text.
To put it another way, is that you see how I choose, what is the discernment, what is the, how to, is first of all, the commentaries and that are given by like Geshe Chekawa, who is really the whole of this lineage, who really embodies this thing. He's every word is, thing, and it's very precious. You understand that one? It's almost like root commentary. Because Geshe Rinpoche himself did not make a auto commentary, no?
No.
I think it's not, because we looked at it. I don't think he made a commentary to the 8 verses himself. But then, of course, also, like in the modern time, we very much recognize, like his own Dalai Lama. He's very much on hold of this lineage, and his commentaries, his sayings are extremely precious. At the same time also, maybe also there are certain commentaries by certain masters who themselves, they are holders, they are part of the lineage. However, they're not as known or as, as Geshe Chekawa or whatever, but yet there's really brilliant things that come because they've reflected deeply, they've experienced this, and they've also had an experience of teaching, and so they have experience of dealing with people, life experiences. So therefore we choose those sayings, which are those parts of commentaries that which have a particular kind of something that's more apt, and you understand. And also sometimes I use also not in this 8 verses, but then others also I choose, like the modern teachers, more like people like Chogyam Trungpa and others, more people who have had experience with the West, their commentaries, their interpretations. So it's good to bring all this together. That I think is a new Rime. Rime is a kind of non-sectarian, ecumenical kind of thing. But that's to really bring the teachings of all the great masters from all traditions, really to bring that. Now we come to the 6th verse.
The 6th verse, the main point is, recognize one who harms you as more kind than one who helps you. When someone whom I have helped, or in whom I have placed great hopes, mistreats me in extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my precious teacher. When someone whom I have helped, or in whom I have placed great hope, harms me with great injustice, may I see that one as a sacred friend. Or, even when someone I've helped, or in whom I have placed great hopes, mistreats me very unjustly, I will view that person as a true spiritual teacher.
Kala daki pentape rewa chewa kanki ki shundumiri ne shena hinyen tamberta ho.
When we help someone, generally speaking, we tend to expect certain things in return. Or when someone is close to you, you tend to have certain expectations of that person. If that person, instead of responding to you in a positive way and repaying your kindness, inflicts harm upon you, normally you feel, as an ordinary person, a sense of outrage. In these cases, our sense of disappointment and hurt are so strong and so deep that we feel totally justified in reacting with outrage and anger. Just imagine that you've been generous and supportive to someone who came from another country. He eventually went back home. After some time, you decided you wanted to travel to his country because you'd never visited it before. Feeling confident that you have at least one friend there, you set off. But instead of welcoming you when you meet again, the person is hostile, seizes your belongings, and turns you over to the police, who put you in prison. Naturally, you'd feel utterly betrayed by such brutal behavior. But a true practitioner sees this person who has betrayed his or her trust as a spiritual teacher. How marvelous it would be to regard all living beings as our teachers. It seems somewhat easier to regard the harm that others inflict as the result of our own past actions, and to consider that they have a special karmic connection to us because of our previous actions towards them. But it is much more difficult to see those who dislike and harm us as our teachers. Bodhisattvas are delighted when they encounter annoying and challenging people, and they feel grateful for each opportunity to improve their patience. For this reason, they value and respect such people.
Basically, it's like this. It's really when you develop that strength of that mind of bodhicitta, and really, it becomes. Remember I was telling you about, like sometimes, when it's a bit like that, Sometimes in the teachings, when you speak about like the commitment to the teacher or to the teachings, the reliableness, In the same manner, in the Bodhicitta teachings, what is that? It's somebody who doesn't turn against the sentient beings. You understand? Under whatever circumstances, you will never turn against anybody. You know, even if somebody harms you in a way that you cannot imagine, you don't become against that person. Normally, you get angry. You know, if you instead of that, if you can really see that as your best teacher, that means that how great you are. Then you're really a Bodhisattva. Really, this is really. If you really like that, then you become so. How do you say? You really the embodiment of goodness, an embodiment of reliability. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think if you can do like that, if you're able to do like this, there is incredible merit. You know, in fact, you know, if you're able to do like this, it's really from a spiritual point of view, it's really the cause for your enlightenment. Meaning, if you're able to do these things, then really, you know, this will what bring you enlightenment. If you really, truly from your heart to be able to do that, then there's really the greatness in that. You understand? In life, you know, sometimes I think, you know, when we help somebody, we sometimes have to, you know, it's like an investment, you know. Investment is like our expectation that this person is going to be nice to you. You understand? Will have gratitude and appreciation. If you have this kind of attitude, you know, you don't know that such things can happen. When that happens, then it doesn't completely, how do you say, just doesn't completely put you out of balance, so to speak, you know. Or for that matter, when such things happen, instead of, you see, what is amazing about these kind of teachings is that, you know, when worse things can happen, then you realize that, you see, that's how life is. That's how samsara is. That you accept suffering. You accept, you know. Do you understand it? When you kind of realize that, you know, when you realize that, when that kind of thing happens, you know, and when this kind of thing happens, when you have, for example, teaching like this that shows you, then there is something that you know, particularly when the worst possible kind of a disappointment happens, there's a solace, there's a comfort. Instead of seeing the situation as a defeat and a loss, you can turn the whole thing around to the practice of compassion and willingly offer it to the victory to others, take the loss upon yourself. Or in fact, even if someone you helped and, you know, and it would, you know, and hurt you in a way you cannot imagine, then, you know, instead of really reacting normally, which would in fact not help, which would in fact, I mean, you know, would create even further karma. And so instead of that, if you really have the bigness of the heart, and to realize this, and just to also to see this is a great opportunity, you know, that really an incredible opportunity for you to learn. I think sometimes Western people are very good, you know, very good that, you know, sometimes challenge, like they realize the kind of the tremendous learning opportunity. There is tremendous, you know, opportunity. So I think you should see therefore that there's tremendous merit there, tremendous benefit, and so therefore you consider them as your greatest guru or your greatest teacher, because they offer you an incredible opportunity. Do you understand it? To really to try to see that way. And then when you can see that way, then of course, if you really can practice like that, I think the merit is incredible. When you can really see that, it means that you have some understanding of the view also, of the nature of how things are, you know. How everything is also just as when you realize something, then you need the whole, everything is kind of illusory, you know. How it's impermanent, how it's samsara, you understand? All these things. Also you realize that maybe it's because of your karma also. Maybe this happens because of something you may have done in your past also. Similarly. So see that therefore as an opportunity of purification. And you understand? So really, it's like all these teachings, you know, help you to realize and really almost be inspired by that. I mean, how incredible thing would be if such a situation inspire you instead of kind of, you know, Sometimes it's interesting is, I find that real difficult situation like this sometimes can really offer you an incredible opportunity. But not such great, difficulty, but these, just like, the everyday nitty-gritty, like the problems of samsara. That's the difficult one. More difficult one is do you know what I mean? The everyday, the nitty-gritty, having to do your washing up, doing this and that and everything, job, all those things is what's really, that's called fundamental suffering. Yeah, really. That's the one that really requires much more, awareness and much more, you need inspiration, practice. But when it's something really strong thing like this hit, sometimes it really brings the best out of you. Sometimes human beings, when faced with really crisis, it can kind of, bring the best out of you. Like personally myself, whenever I had really faced great difficulties, it really been, sometimes it's an incredible, and really an opportunity for me also. But of course you don't enjoy it. But then you really realize, you really take that as a practice and really.
When others let us down badly and are ungrateful, we have an excellent opportunity to see clearly how far we've developed. Geshe Chekawa told a story about Dromtempa. Dromtempa was the principal disciple of Atisha, who of course pioneered the Lojong teachings in Tibet. He told this story. When I was in Kham, I went to visit the master Sherapar, who was a dear friend. I went, although I knew he hadn't invited me, and he took offence at this and sent me away. He ordered other people to take all my things away, while he himself locked me in a dark room. It was then that it became clear whether I had trained my mind in love and compassion or not. And it became...
He was testing him. It was not that he was being unkind. In fact, he was being very kind. Such kindness are extremely rare.
And it became clear whether the verse, "May these sufferings ripen upon me, may all my happiness ripen upon them," was what I was truly practicing or not. Our enemies are those who dislike us and try to harm us. Now, doctors may cause us pain while examining us or cutting us up during surgical procedures, but their intention is always for us to get well, so we don't see the doctor as an enemy. Although annoying people may not be well disposed towards us and have no intention of helping us, they nevertheless are doing us a favour by enabling us to increase our capacity to remain patient. And for this reason, we should value them and respect them. This may seem odd, but in fact, we do esteem and revere other things that have no specific intention to help us. For example, we treat volumes of the teachings with respect as something valuable, even though they don't have any feelings nor the intention to help us. We do this because we know practicing what's inside the texts themselves can produce many good qualities. At present, though, we find it hard to be patient even with those who have affection for us. What patience we do have is only for those we like and not with those we dislike. We manage to be patient with important people. We manage to be patient with those in authority, often because we have no choice and we're scared to show our anger. But when the other person is weaker than we are, we feel no compunction about expressing our anger. The love and the compassion that a Bodhisattva tries to develop embraces all living beings without exception. This requires that we feel close to them all, because unless we can, we'll never succeed in developing bodhicitta. So despite our reluctance, we must learn to relate to our enemies instead of rejecting them. This begins with the way we think. Then again, There are people we dislike on sight, who've never done anything to hurt or offend us. Others may similarly take an instant dislike to us. These kind of people are a special kind of category mentioned in the instructions of Lojong. We need to take particular care towards them. Bodhisattvas should really feel delighted when they meet such people. Sincere practitioners of Lojong feel happy to come across those towards whom they can practice patience. With these kind of people, you become grateful to them because they're doing you the greatest favor. If they rob you, they're robbing your ego. If they hurt you, they're hurting your ego, which is the best thing that could happen to you, because ego is what really hurts you. If you can do that, you overcome hope and fear, the two biggest things that trap us in samsara.
In fact, ego is what really is the cause of our being born in samsara, eon after eon. So really, that's what need to purify.
One very important thing is, first of all, you have to distinguish between yourself and ego. It's when you think ego is you, then you get hurt. So this is a mental training.
When you talk about ego, there's kind of two egos. One is ego in the sense of self. I mean, that's not necessarily something bad. We all have a sense of self. Yeah. But whereas when we talk about ego, there's a negative aspect, which creates all negativity, which out of ignorance, you see, and become the source of samsara, of suffering. That's the ego that we are trying to get rid of. And that, and often the trouble is that always ego assumes you. It's like really, how would you put it? It really pretends to be you. In fact, we identify so much ourselves with ego that like we do everything for it in a sense. That's where our really wrong sacrifice, You understand? That's where we, I think sometimes a lot of the trouble that we bring upon ourselves is because of egoistic ways in which, we do that really bring us all the troubles. I mean, ego is someone that kind of really, actually we think ego is us, it pretends to be us, but actually it's not you. It's something that really, it's a bit like someone who is, if you were to give an example of someone, sometimes you can see in old fairy stories of, I remember one, I think, where there's this evil advisor, very sly and sneaky one. He pretends to be like for the king. King is a bit stupid, Yeah, and he wants to marry his daughter and just want to really try to be for him, It's a bit like it's a kind of a usurper, I'm not explaining very well. I really pretend to be you, and probably sometimes, I think I've mentioned in the Tibetan book of Living Dying, chapter 8, there are talks about ego. Ego and the spiritual part, there's a section on that. And so the way it gets you is that you so much identify, in the teachings here, you separate yourself from the ego. You really look and see what is really you and what is ego. Because sometimes, you see, we think ego, the reason why ego is so powerful, that it thinks it's working for your benefit, for your well-being. So much so that like it's you. So therefore it's very difficult. And you go in the egoistic way, negative way. You understand? Here in the teaching you really examine, you separate. Like in the teachings, I remember His Holiness Dalai Lama often say that when you made a mistake, when you say, I confess, or I made a mistake, when you apologize, what it really shows that you are good, but your actions are not good. Always the recognition that you are good, but your actions are not so. So you confess. So in that way, when you recognize your real nature, then you know also the egoistic way that you've done is not so, it's something evil, something negative, so you confess. And you separate. So I think the main point I'm saying is that ego really kind of assumes you and really kind of sneaks in and takes you over, dominates you, and creates all kinds of suffering, really, when you talk about the precious sublime bodhicitta, may it rise in whom it has not risen, but may it never fail where it's risen, but go on increasing further. So what is that can make your bodhicitta decline? Is ego and its partner, the anger. These are the two enemies. So therefore, since practice that is antidote to anger is patience. That's why it's all about patience, tolerance, all that. You understand? The attitude to develop that. That's why often it's said there's no virtue like patience, there's no evil like anger.
Geshe Chekawa says, were it not for our negative karma, such events as being mistreated would not befall us. We should think that we are in fact to blame for whatever befalls us.
Now, when you say blame, again, you should not really say blame and I'm bad. I think you see, normally, when you've done something negative also, when you accept the negativity as something bad, doesn't mean that you are bad. It's very important. I think it's very important to remember the fundamental basis of the teachings is that we all have Buddha nature. Regardless we all have the potential of enlightenment. In fact, our nature is as good as any Buddha's Buddha nature. Do you understand? And that in spite of, for example, all our negativity, the negative karma, emotions, that's Buddha nature is never stained and touched. I mentioned that to you. What the teaching does is to recognize who you are. We need to empower our Buddha nature, our potential. Is that clear? You do. At the same time, also you recognize your negative aspect, ego, as not really you. And so you abandon that. You eliminate. And you direct, all your teachings, particularly compassion, to overcome. That's the thing. Really, teachings really, it's very important to empower yourself. Really to recognize. I think sometimes we don't do that, really, honestly. And we don't do that as a result, like our self-esteem. Because where your self-esteem should be based is who you really are ultimately. That's what you need. That's why when you come to recognize like nature of mind, teaching on the nature of mind, the teaching on, when you really discover the nature of mind, when you have a real experience of that, it's extraordinarily empowering. It's extraordinarily empowering. I have said in the benefits of meditation, I spoke about the extraordinary benefit it brings to you on the outer, inner and innermost level. So what we need to do is we need to empower. We are all very special. We are all unique. In fact, we are all Buddhas to be. We are that great. From the highest point of view, like even when you show compassion, from the Dzogchen point of view, compassion not shown that all poor sentient beings, they are miserable, and you don't see like a compassion in a kind of a condescending way, Particularly sometimes I'm told that in English or from a Christian point of view, often compassion equals pity. It's not that at all. From a Buddhist point of view, when you really, particularly the higher you go, the greater the view, the understanding, the deeper the respect. That when you really look, you recognize all beings have the potential of enlightenment. In fact, Buddha also, when he became enlightened, he knew that all beings had the same potential, And that's one of the reasons he wanted to really show each one their true nature. He was not trying to start a new religion and to, convert them into Gautama Buddhism, but rather a way that each one may discover their own enlightenment. Is that clear? So sometimes I say it's really the most modern kind of, religion, because not imposing any dogma, but rather a way for each one of us. Because, these that people I want my way. Well, that's Buddhism for you. Yeah, and, way for you to personally gain your own enlightenment but not in a negative way, of course, not in an egoistic way, but you know. So that very, very much that we all have the Buddha nature, and we all. But then you see how you show compassion. They all have Buddha nature, but unfortunately, because of ignorance, delusion, and negative karma, it's obscured, and so as a result they suffer. So you begin to feel a compassion for them. It's a bit like when you have someone, a friend of you, who's an extraordinary genius, who's a very good person. He could make such. He could, if he really looked after himself, he could be such a good person, so much benefit for himself. But then he's completely kind of in drugs or drinks or wasting his life away. You would feel. Now, so you show compassion. You wanted to show them, to bring them back to their true nature. So it's always with the respect that, I think that's very important. I think sometimes I think more and more you actually have the teachings, and more you practice, it empowers you, your true nature, so that it gives you more confidence, more security in a sense, in the deeper way, and then like a certainty, like an inner refuge, so that whatever happens outside, it sometimes doesn't bother you. That you find that like there's an inner refuge, like a carefree dignity, a natural simplicity, even though the world may be falling apart, but you find there's natural simplicity. I remember when I was younger, I faced many, many difficulties. I was one of the first people to start teaching in the West, began. And then I faced many, many difficulties, many, many difficulties, because what I was doing was sometimes not so conventional. And many difficulties, all kinds of things. But in those days, whenever I used to feel difficulties, or bad talk, or disappointment, immediately really, that's why I think thanks to my masters, thanks to the teaching, the blessing, is that each time I hear something negative, something, immediately, it's like because normally when you do something bad, you withdraw, isn't it? But instead of withdrawing, there's like, I have a really sense that, it doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't matter in the final analysis. These things don't matter anyway. But then you discover why? Because why that doesn't matter? Because there is something deep inside you. You find like inner refuge, something that really, and you realize that that only thing you need to do, you need to practice. You need to study, you need to practice. So it gives you even more inspiration. Doesn't lose hope, but in fact gives you more courage. There's a saying in the Lojong teachings, for example, in the 7 points of mind training by Geshe Chekawa, says, when the world is full of evil, all mishaps should be transformed into part of the Bodhi. Whenever there's negativity comes, you should be more encouraged. Not by negativity, but you should be more inspired to work, not be despair and give up. The sense of that is really very strong feeling. It's like almost an automatic reaction that I have. So therefore I never lose heart. And there's always like a kind of courage that comes from within, and thanks to the teachings. Because perhaps the teachings have given me some understanding, some confidence in myself, which is given to me by my masters, really. Is that clear? So it's very important that you need to build up, and you need to be strong. You need to be confident and humble. And when you have that, then then you become wise and and confident, and and then you have also like a humor you have in that whatever things happen on the outside, it really doesn't really matter. You begin to see, It's a bit like, if you lost a few pounds, from somebody's store or something, it don't matter because you got a few more, much more, It's kind of not such a good example, but, like if you've got like $1 million or something, or £1 million or €1 million, then if you lose a few hundred, pounds or something, it doesn't really bother you so much. Maybe someone who's kind of lost it for you, or somebody might get really upset saying, I'm so sorry I lost the money. They say, don't worry, it's okay, I have more. So very much that sense of confidence in yourself. And that's where it's very important to differentiate between you and ego. That's very important. That's the differentiation between samsara and nirvana. For example, in the Dzogchen teachings, there is in the Dzogchen training, there's what's called Rushen. Rushen is when you separate. Like an army, when they do like a presentation, they kind of, different divisions, they all line up, and separate and clearly. It's like almost that you separate samsara, put them in one line, and nirvana one line kind of thing. You separate in yourself, You separate, you clarify. What is, you see, good, what is really you, and what is not you, what is, ego, what is that, and you separate that, and then you really see clearly what is that you need to really keep, what is you acknowledge that, and what is not you actually get rid of, overcome. Is that clear? But the trouble is that we're so wound up in the ego, and we're so kind of confused and messed up that we don't know who we really are. Instead, we think ego is us, and so we do everything, we surrender to the ego and follow its biddings, and we're dominated by it. And that's where we're not free. I often tell people, people think I'm your teacher, but it's not, I'm not your guru. Your real guru is your ego. You follow your ego, that's the thing. That's your master, you always follow. Very obediently, and you have such incredible devotion for your ego. Such dedication. No wonder result you see on samsara. That's the miracle of your devotion, the result of that. Anyway, so we continue.
We should think that in some sense we are, you could say, to blame for whatever befalls us. And in this manner, by maintaining a warm heart, we remain happy. And because we don't transfer the blame onto others, they remain happy too. Reflect. What this being, and that means the being or person...
Blame in a sense of you just simply accept. Not that you blame yourself, like again, beat yourself. You just simply say, well, that's my ego. You recognize it's the ego and the negative karma that you've done in the past. As a result, you're maturing these, so just simply recognize is ego's, how'd you say? You accept kind of responsibility in a sense of, and not blaming others in a sense. But that doesn't mean you're beating yourself. That's important. Not blaming yourself, I think what happens is sometimes ego is so skillful, it gets you in the process, It sandwiches you in the ego. And so therefore you get hurt because of ego. And that's really, I think where you have to have an outrage is you should have an outrage with ego. Where the injustice is ego. That's where, like some of the Lojong teachings of some of the great Kadampa masters, there's a lot of dialogue between you and the ego. You're saying like almost, you ego, you have like, for millions, eons you have brought me into suffering, so now I do not want you, It's like separating. And many of the teachings, it's like almost like how'd you say, it's an inner dialogue with ego. Like the word, for example, like the, this Bodhisattva, guide to the Bodhisattva way of life. Quite a lot of them is very much like that. Yep. Then?
You should reflect. What this being, the one who's mistreating me, has given me actually helps me to purify my negative karma and accumulate merit and wisdom. Therefore, he has benefited me. So, I must view him as my spiritual teacher, no different from the one who has conferred on me the oral transmissions for the meditation practice.
I think when you talk about the spiritual master as somebody who grants you the greatest gift, who grants you the greatest accomplishment. So when you say, when someone who I have helped or in whom I have placed great hope mistrusts me, mistreats me, extremely hurt, well may I regard him still as my precious teacher. This one thing is that this is one that he's on Dalai Lama, very much in his, particularly in the early days, when we came out as refugee from Tibet, he experienced so much difficulty, really. That time Dalai Lama was not like now, known, and respected. He was respected, but by only a small group of people, and he was pretty much alone. And we didn't have very many friends in those days, really. We were quite alone. We had no support. And in those days, really, that these teachings were really his, his inner strength, what made him really survive, overcome. He used to say, whenever he faces such difficulties, he used to always look at the life of the great masters. He used to always read their life stories. Sometimes the life of the great masters, the biography or the autobiography of this great master is called in Tibetan Namtar. Namtar means the story, the life and liberation, how they became liberated, how they overcame. You understand? So it's to read the life of all these great masters. And then when you read the life of these great masters, what they went through, what they endured, how they overcame, he said, it gives me, tremendous strength. He used to say that when you read the life of the great masters, you see, many like the Milarepa and many of the great masters, when you read them, then you realize that, you see, what you're going through is so little in compared to what they endured, what they overcame. So give me inner strength. And then teaching like this gives inner strength. And that really, he always says, I remember I had the great good fortune to actually accompany His Holiness on his first visit to England, actually. First visit to Europe. I was a little bit involved in his visit first, because His Dalai Lama had that time only one representative in Geneva. During that time, I remember when he was in England here, he had in a interview with BBC, one of the first interviews that he did, major interviews he did, in that he spoke about how he used to say that if I was in the Potala, if I was in Tibet in the old days, I might have a better situation. But then now, because of, being a refugee and with all the troubles, he said, Dalai Lama says, it really gives me, spiritually, it gives me more, strength. It gives really. So as a result, he used to say, the Chinese are my best teacher. He really used to come because of the Chinese, all the difficulty they experienced. They are his actually best teacher. When someone you helped or, and this person turns against you and mistreats in a way that is unimaginable, normally you'd be outraged by that. But here, according to this approach, which is extraordinary, I mean, when something like that, you see, the amazing thing is you can turn that completely around. You can turn it completely around. Instead of looking at them with outrage and anger, you consider them as your best teacher. You can really, it's like you take, the extraordinary thing of this, whenever something like negative thing that, through this kind of a way, any negative circumstance can be turned into your advantage. But again, you're not doing just to turn into an advantage, not a strategy, but truly from the heart. You can really, instead of getting, you begin to look at more in a deeper, far-reaching way. You don't look at more immediately and see the kind of the outrage and anger for the injustice, for the wrong that's done, but rather you look in a deep way and saying that perhaps this situation happening maybe due to the fact that perhaps in the past you may have done a similar thing to this person. So it's coming back to you, a boomerang. Could be that. So if that is the case, then this act can actually finish that negative karma. You're repaying your debt, it's finishing, it's purifying. So such an extraordinary, also an opportunity. At the same time also, and then when you are able to actually do that and transform that way, it brings tremendous, as you say, what this being has given me helps me to purify negative karma and accumulate merit and wisdom. Therefore, he has benefited in me in a way that no one can benefit. Particularly somebody really, the greater the harm, or that, in a sense, the greater the benefit, if you can, and if you can turn around that, you see. So therefore, I must view that just because spiritual teachers is one that brings the greatest benefit to you spiritually. So in some ways, this enemy or this person who turns against you, in fact, if you can really use it well, it's up to you. It's not that he's doing a particular favor, but your attitude, you see, the training of the Lojong. If you really can see it in the true way, you can make that person's, what he does to you, as the greatest benefit, just as would a teacher would benefit you. You will see it like your spiritual teacher. Is that clear? Bring that spiritual benefit. Basically, if you have this kind of attitude, if you develop, slowly you become a saint. And the really holy person is you become when you have this attitude. Sometimes you see, just thinking about it, like when you turn your head around and begin to see. At this particular moment, you're not outraged by anything at the moment. Anyway, we can just comfortably sit here and speculate and just, entertain these notions. But even when you do so, when you really realize if you can have this kind of attitude, and how amazing it is, isn't it? If somebody does that like that, then you have such a respect for that person, or something really noble. Is that so? Okay. So, as Atisha said,
whether someone is a friend or foe, those objects that give rise to destructive emotions, he who sees them as spiritual teachers will be joyful wherever he lives. Geshe Chekawa says, Dharma refers to the transformation...
this is very important. Geshe Chekawa said, Dharma, that means the spiritual teachings, Dharma, actually refers to the transformation of your mind.
And not to the transformation of the external environment.
It's like you may make very nice, very spiritual environment, you display tankas, have images, wear nice robes. It's lovely, play symbols, and be religiously kind of, very religious. In fact, there was a story of one hermit, a great hermit. He was actually, he was always in retreat. And he has a sponsor, the benefactor, who, supply all the kind of his requirements so that he could practice. So one day he was told that he was coming to visit him. So then he cleaned up nicely, he made the offerings very nicely and just sat there, and then he received his guest, his benefactor. And then while he was there, just kind of suddenly he thought to himself, oh, this is just hypocrisy. I'm making this offering, not just genuinely, just to impress him. So thereupon, you see, Tibetans, for example, they don't have electricity, they just have wood fire. Then they have a little oven, where they have like a charcoals, there's ash, and then you just put the, like an earthen pot, with the tea. So the tea is always hot, boiling, So he took a handful of ash and just threw it into the shrine. He said that actually that's the best offering. He said, oh, this is just hypocrisy, just outer show. And that offering is really the greatest offering. That doesn't mean that you now go around to every shrine and just start throwing handful of ash. You first set it up nicely, then you take some handful, say, I'm like, that again, not really, But that when basically what it really means is that Dharma is refers to the transformation of your mind and not the transformation of your external environment.
For those who have trained their minds, even if the three worlds of humans, gods and demons rise up as their enemies, their minds will not be afflicted by non-virtue or suffering. Since no one can defeat such a person, he is called a hero.
Hero. That's why Bodhisattva in Tibetan, Chanchup Sempa, the word pa has a sense of a warrior, like a hero, or somebody courageous, somebody never perturbed. That Bodhisattva warrior, it's often said that, what is the Bodhisattva warrior? He wears the armor of patience, endurance. Bodhisattva is, the treasure is what is generosity, is his infinite treasure of generosity. And he has the perfume, is the discipline that permeates. And he wears the armor of endurance. Endurance is better than patience, because patience is maybe, okay, I shall be patient, my turn will come. It's more endurance, so not to be perturbed by anything. Forbearance, you see, to be able to. That's armor of patience. Then he rides on the horse of diligence. And then his mind is always in the state of non-distraction, which is what meditation. Meditation is the state of non-distraction. And he has the sword of wisdom, like the Manjushri. So that's a Bodhisattva. So he's a hero in the sense of that he has a tremendous courage. Whatever happens to him, he has never, nothing perturbs him. You understand? Very much. Particularly when you have an attitude like that, then nothing can harm. And sometimes when you happen like this, if you like this, then even harm or negativity, like let's say if there are negative spirits harming you, after a while they get fed up. They tell you, they're probably the spirits when they hang around in cafes, discussing who they've been their clients recently or who they've been, saying, oh, don't go there, don't go there. I go and harm. Each time I harm, it becomes better. Don't go there. Go other one. This one takes me more seriously. So that's also in the teachings, by the way, since up the year 2001, after the 9/11, I've been actually focused on the teaching called Turning Suffering and Happiness into Enlightenment. This is teaching that is connected very much on the paramita of transcendence of endurance or patience, very much teaching, and how to transform suffering. And also happiness, because sometimes also we may think we have a problem with suffering, but also sometimes, we don't know how to deal with happiness. There's one great master called, I think, Kadampa Sangye, who said, human beings can endure a lot of suffering, but very little happiness. So that teaching, I've given the teaching over 2 years, and that's been now developed into you can get them on the, I think in DVD or CD or whatever, the text, you can receive them. And you can get some kind of more the essential version, you can get more fuller version, or there's a medium length also. So you can, and those teachings are extremely helpful in overcoming difficult circumstances. These are all connected together with this teaching.
So, the 5th and the 6th verses of these 8 verses describe the practice of exchanging self and others. In the 5th verse, a situation is described where someone harms us maliciously. Instead of retaliating, we offer all gain to the other and accept defeat. In the 6th verse, someone we've helped responds with ingratitude, and we accept that response, looking on that person as our teacher. In both of these cases, we are practicing the exchange of self and others by putting the other first.
In fact, if you really know how to do this, then actually you will never get really hurt. You understand? The hurt comes. The hurt comes when you take ego seriously. That hurt. When you have this kind of teaching, they'll overcome. Now the 7th verse.
The keynote of the 7th verse is, give help and happiness to others and take on their harm and suffering. The translations.
In brief, may I offer benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly. May I quietly take upon myself all hurt and pains of my mothers. In the other translations?
In short, may I offer both directly and indirectly all joy and benefit to all beings, my mothers, and may I myself secretly take on all their hurt and suffering. Or, in brief, directly or indirectly, I will offer help and happiness to all my mothers, and secretly take upon myself all their harm and suffering. This verse refers to the practice of Tonglen,
which is giving and receiving, giving and taking.
Which is giving out of love and taking out of compassion.
They said, you see, and in the 7 points of mind training that he says, giving and receiving should be practiced alternately. This alternation should be placed on the medium of breath. And that you find in chapter 12, chapter on compassion, that teaching on Tonglen is introduced there, you know.
So all good things you give to others, and whatever misfortune and suffering and distress that others have, you take upon yourself. In this verse, the giving practice is mentioned first, followed by the taking practice. But when you're meditating and doing the actual practice, you have to reverse this order. First you take away all the sufferings and problems of sentient beings, and then you give them all your goodness.
That is what Dalai Lama says?
Whatever misfortunes other beings have, take them upon yourself with tremendous determination and compassion. In a material sense, this exchange doesn't actually take place, but it is an extremely useful practice for developing courage.
The word secretly here suggests that it's a form of practice of compassion. It is a form of practice of compassion that perhaps may not be suitable for beginner at the beginner stage. It is not as an easy practice to do. It is a form of mental training that requires a certain amount of depth of courage and commitment. Also, you see, there's also another thing. The secretly may also refer to the need for us a certain amount of integrity on the part of the practitioner, so that the practice of Tonglen is done in a discreet way and the practitioner does not become an exhibitionist.
This is the essence of Mahayana practice of Lojong, of training the mind. And even though we are not yet bodhisattvas, we can begin to train ourselves in this now.
In fact, Geshe Chekawa Yishidorji states in the 7 points of mind training, he says, it is the inner state of mind and thought emotions which need to be radically transformed and overhauled. But in terms of external appearance of the person, one should remain the same. Change is inside, not the change is outside appearance, but within. Can you read that again, Patrick?
Geshe Chekawa Yishidoji states in his 7-point training of the mind, it is the inner states of mind and thoughts and emotions which need to be radically transformed and overhauled. But in terms of external appearance of the person, one should remain the same. And the Tibetan Book of Living Dying, chapter 12, says, you may be asking yourself this question. If I take in the sufferings and pain of others, won't I risk harming myself? The one thing you should know for certain is that the only thing that Tonglen could harm is the one thing that has been harming you the most, your own ego, your self-grasping, self-cherishing mind, which is the root of suffering. For if you practice Tonglen as often as possible, this self-grasping mind will get weaker and weaker, and your true nature, compassion, will be given a chance to emerge more and more strongly. the stronger and greater your compassion, the stronger and greater your fearlessness and confidence.
In fact, you see, that's why what is amazing is that there's actually evidence of this. Evidence of this, if you look into chapter 12, there are the lepers, for example, many lepers. There was leprosy epidemic. When they start actually practicing Tonglen, the lepers were taking on the suffering and pain of illness of others, and giving their happiness, well-being to them, taking on their suffering and pain with compassion and giving their happiness, well-being, healing to them. In the process, they get healed. Which means that when you take up on the suffering, pain of others, it's not directed against you. It's directed against what? Your ego. Which is the cause of all. In the ego is the kind of the embodiment of all negativity. In fact, according to Tibetan medicine, the root cause of all our suffering, all our illnesses, comes from the three poisons. They come first from ignorance, then the three poisons. So since it's destroying, and the embodiment that is ego, since it's direct, I remember his old Dalai Lama saying very much that the Tonglen practice is really direct against the ego. The destruction, the purifying of ego. When that's done, what's amazing is that you see what benefit it brings to you really. It's really a very clear evidence of how. Is that clear? So shows exactly how ego is not you. This is where we need to separate, This is where if you really come to recognize, if you can recognize your ego and separate yourself. This is, I think, where real spiritual maturity comes in. When you come to recognize yourself and empower yourself, have confidence in yourself, whereas you begin to look at your negative, the ego aspect of it, and then slowly relinquish that. If you come to that, then that's maturity. Then there's progress.
So compassion reveals itself yet again as your greatest resource and your greatest protection. As Shantideva says, whoever wishes to quickly afford protection to both himself and others should practice that holy secret, the exchanging of self for others. The practice itself is described...
Now this is just giving you a little bit. We can read in the Tibetan Book of Living Dying anyway, chapter 12. It's there. But we're just going to give you on page 206 till page 212. But then more, fuller teaching of this is available, which educates people, because I think that you need a lot of education. Because sometimes, again, I've had a feeling a little bit, Western people can do Tonglen like a feel-good practice, which on some ways you can do. In fact, as I've suggested in the Tibetan Book of Living Dying, it could be like a way of even healing yourself, for example, a self-Tonglen, which might not be at this level of the practice of the selflessness, but that, for example, when you really, but there's an aspect of you that's been wounded and hurt, For example, when you lack the love and understanding, then you can practice there's an aspect of yourself that's wounded. Let's say that's the B aspect of you. And then A aspect of you is someone who understands, and who loves you. You understand? Who practices the teaching of compassion and love. So what you just do, then you in this practice, the A aspect of you takes on all the B's, grievance, pain, suffering, and gives them, say, I understand you, I love you, I give you that, gives a kind of a huge hug. This practice can be done first on the environmental levels, because environmental kind of Tonglen, which is kind of when sometimes situations, certain things are something irksome, some kind of negativity, you can breathe in the negativity and the pain and the suffering, and then you give in the joy. It's a bit like an air conditioning. You take the hot air and transform it into cool air. First on the environmental level. Then on a personal level. There is this way. That's not the real Tonglen, but it's kind of in terms of perhaps a therapeutic approach of beginning and then the real practice of Tonglen. So
the practice itself is described in the Tibetan Book of Living Dying, which sets out different stages and approaches to the practice, such as environmental Tonglen, self-Tonglen, Tonglen in a living situation, and Tonglen for others before we embrace the main Tonglen practice itself. In the main Tonglen practice of giving and receiving, we take on, through compassion, all the various mental and physical sufferings of all beings, their fear, pain, anger, bewilderment, doubt and rage. Now, when we talk about the suffering of beings, we're aware that all the kinds of suffering that beings go through are described as being as the result of unskillful actions, which are caused by destructive emotions.
And which comes from ignorance.
We take all of this and we give them, through love, all our happiness and well-being, peace of mind and fulfillment. Before you begin the practice, sit quietly, bring your mind home and meditate deeply on compassion. Summon and invoke the presence of all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas and enlightened beings, so that through their inspiration and blessing, compassion may be born in your heart. Imagine in front of you, as vividly and as poignantly as possible, someone you care for who is suffering. Try and imagine every aspect of the person's pain and distress. Then, as you feel your heart opening in compassion towards the person, imagine that all of his or her sufferings manifest together and gather into a great mass of hot, black, grimy smoke. Now, as you breathe in, visualize that this mass of black smoke dissolves with your in-breath into the very core of your self-grasping at your heart.
That's the ego, you see, goes into the heart of ego.
And it destroys completely all traces of self-cherishing.
This is like actually bomb that destroys ego. Tonglen.
As it destroys completely all traces of self-cherishing, so it purifies all your negative karma.
Oh, really. Not only you take upon the suffering and pain of others, that as a result it destroys it destroys the core of your negativity, which is the ego, and thereby purifies you of all your negative karma.
All our miseries and unwanted experiences are a result of our selfishness. So we imagine this as a black lump at our heart that is destroyed by the stream of other suffering which we take on. This can be described like a vacuum cleaner. You mentally pull towards you all of these negative causes and results which manifest in the suffering of the person you are practicing for, in the form of this grimy smoke, and dissolve them into yourself. After you dissolve these bad causes and results into yourself, give them all to your self-cherishing mind. This self-cherishing mind is the attitude that only looks at how to benefit only you all the time, which wants you to look after yourself. So now you give these bad causes and bad results to this mind by dissolving them into it. Think to yourself, eat this self-cherishing mind, eat this, and now that you've been fed, be satisfied. Then imagine that this completely satisfies your selfishness. There is no need for you to feel uncomfortable about doing this practice. Don't think, I can't do this, it's too disgusting. Actually, the practice is not enjoyable. But if you can do it, it is like, as they say, killing 2 deer with 1 arrow.
There's a Tibetan English saying it, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Yeah.
On the one hand, you're taking away the suffering of all these sentient beings, or this particular sentient being that you're focusing on. On the other hand, you are taming your own self-cherishing mind.
That's very good, this point.
And as we know, self-cherishing is the worst of obstacles. But if you can satisfy it by giving it these sufferings, it'll disappear and leave you in peace.
From the Tibetan book Living and Dying.
So imagine now that your self-cherishing has been destroyed, that the heart of your enlightened mind, your bodhicitta, is fully revealed. As you breathe out then, imagine that you are sending out its brilliant, cooling light of peace, joy, happiness, and ultimate well-being to your friend in pain, and that its rays are purifying all their negative karma. So, Shantideva says, your bodhicitta has transformed your heart, or your whole body and being itself, into a dazzling, wish-fulfilling jewel. A jewel that can grant the desires and wishes of anyone, and provides exactly what he longs for and needs.
Truly needs, yeah.
True compassion is the wish-fulfilling jewel, because it has the power to give precisely to each being whatever that being most needs, and so alleviate his or her suffering and bring about his or her true fulfillment. So, we are giving all our happiness and well-being to other beings, and you think, as you do this, I will turn my health and my wealth, my education, my knowledge, my virtue, my merit, every good thing into whatever good things sentient beings may need. Some beings really need a house. Some need furniture. Some need clothes. Some need medicine. Some need money. Imagine that you turn all of your good qualities into the things that sentient beings need, and then give them these things. Then imagine that these beings actually receive the objects and really enjoy them, and that they are completely freed of all their problems and suffering. Rejoice and be happy that you have done this.
See, first of all, this kind of practice, you see, can actually train your mind so that, you see, slowly, you might be able to, when occasions come, that you can actually, do that. You can actually give. I mean, sometimes before we can actually give, we should actually be mentally ready, isn't it? So it can prepare us so that actual situations come that you may be able to offer the help that beings need. That's one thing. The secondly, when you start practicing this way, with the true heart of compassion, it may be that, by the power of your practice, the circumstances may be, situation may be, they may receive the help they need. Maybe not through you, but through some other agent. You see, they may receive. You understand? Like when you think of the people who are, suffering, or just to really pray that may they lead. Sometimes the roads are blocked. There are, like, for example, landslides, all these causing the aids to not reach there. So pray that may the circumstances be that the aids, they each receive what they need, and then may they be helped. If you, through practicing that, the power of this, and also you can invoke Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to aid you, and really pray, send your heart. Who knows? It may help, because the power of prayers are extraordinary, particularly when it's done with this, with such heart of compassion like this. So not just again, just it's because some might think, well, what the use of this? You should actually do it in life. Actually you should go and do it. Well, this is the start. No, this is teaching. When you had teaching on, like on some of you are teaching on the nature mind. You need to have teaching on the nature mind. Realize the illusory nature of these things, that you will not be holding on to. You need to have that view understanding, because then can you do this Tonglen. Because if you take things too real, too solid, then you see you might in your mind create doubts and things. It's important to realize the illusory nature of things. You have a sense of, have a sense of grasping is freed. Then we can do the Tonglen.
Tonglen is so powerful. Even though it is a relative practice of bodhicitta, it becomes almost absolute, because to really practice Tonglen, you must have the realization of absolute bodhicitta. Our commitment also comes from taking the Bodhisattva vow. These two things give us the commitment and enlightened courage we need to enter this practice, and the determination to bring about the enlightenment of all beings.
Because what you're directing it, as his own Dalai Lama says, Tonglen is to destroy ego. Because what is that is in us? That's the cause of all our problems, is ego grasping. So you direct that. You direct that and direct toward, not to you, not you, but the ego, the usurper, the user, the abuser, who pretend to be you but not you, who's the one who throws you in the shit, and worse than the shit, put you in samsara for many eons, is the ego. It directed to it. This really practices, it says secretly, because a high practice is for those who are ready to have the courage to practice that, to really work directly with ego. That's why you see it very much, it destroys you. And then when it's like when you take on the suffering of others and you know where you direct it? In the form of dark clouds, and then you direct it towards destroying your ego, which in a sense is greatest purification. Because you see, ego is one like a magnet that attracts everything. All misfortune, everything. If that's destroyed, then no one to be harmed. No creator of negative emotions. You understand it? So now, in order to do this, you need two things. Two things. That's why it has to be not for a beginner. It has to be two things. That's why I said secretly you practice, is, as you know them, is that either your compassion is so great, if somebody, like, let's say you have like a child or somebody drowning in the water, you won't think you're wearing a beautiful suit. You don't want to think about your suit, you just jump and save the person. Like that. If you really have compassion for somebody, you don't think about yourself. Someone who has that kind of courage and compassion with itself will protect you. Comprends? Other is that this is through meditation, the training in what's called absolute bodhicitta. When you really like on the teaching on shunyata, when you realize how everything is, when you begin to really realize the illusory nature of things, how things that when you realize the nature of emptiness, then even when you take on the negative karma or the illness, that's also illusory. In fact, you are illusory. Even the person you from you is illusory. As it says in the teachings, emptiness cannot hurt emptiness. But yet, that's how it is on the ultimate level. But yet on the relative level, because of there is cause and effect, the karma, that's why we need to go through that also. It's connect with the teaching in the ground, which is in the for example in the study pack, and on the what's called the teaching on explanation of shunyata, takchetantawa, which means free permanence and non-existing. That's one. Because what it really means is that, you see, when you realize the shunyata nature, when you realize it, you see, when you say things are neither, you see, tak chetan, tak means permanent, che means non-existing, tawa means free of. Because when you examine things really in this world, like for example this glass, if you really examine, you see, and it looks as though it's been existing there for centuries, you know. The cup is there for, it's like very permanent. But if I throw this on a hard surface, and then sometimes it might not break, but you know, normally it breaks and goes to pieces, and there's no longer the glass. Now if you break that further into atoms that also dissolve into just light or energy, for example. So therefore, it is not permanent. Comprends? As modern physics have shown, there's no such thing as matter. When we break down matter, even the atom, what they thought was the smallest existing particle, no longer exists. It's only field of energy. So therefore, it is not permanent, free of permanence. That means it's such, But then yet again you say, okay, but then when you realize that, then it frees you, liberates from the one view of extreme view of eternalism. Those believe in the substantial things. But then if you say, well, okay, then, okay, in which case, is it then nothing? Is it nothing? No, it's not nothing. That's also not true. It says free of permanence, non-existing. It's also not non-existing because there is a glass. So that frees you from the extreme view of nihilism. Nihilism, two things. Because when you hold to these two extreme views, they are cause of a lot of problems. So then, what is really? Why? It's not nothing? But then you say, but how does then cup exist? There is nothing called like a glass that's existing independently, permanent. There's no permanent self, ego, like glass ego. Nothing. But then yet how did it come? Because of many causes and conditions. Many conditions. As long as these causes and conditions are there, it exists. As long as they don't exist, it doesn't exist. Hence, impermanence, interdependence, all that thing. And also it shows that, you see, because things, you see, what it teaches, the lesson is, because things are not permanent, it helps us, what the lesson it gives us, that we should let go of attachment to things, because things are not permanent. You understand? Futile to grasp. But at the same time, since it's not nothing, because of many causes and conditions, there is karma, there is interdependence, there is good, that's bad. So therefore we have to respect, become ethical. Not just become like nihilist says, you die tomorrow, You understand? So therefore the real truth is neither existing, neither permanent, non-existing. Things are that, really. That's the humor. That's the mystery. That's the, that is the, that is the, how would you call it? That's the secret. Or that's the beauty. Things exist, but yet they are not permanent. But yet they appear. That's why in the Heart Sutra, in the Wisdom Sutras, it says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form does not differ from emptiness, emptiness does not differ from form. You see, when you examine this glass, when you really examine, it's empty. That means it's not permanent. There's no such thing, Yeah? But yet, that emptiness appears in the form of form. So emptiness does not obstruct the form. Form does not obstruct the emptiness. Emptiness is its essence. That the kind of form is its appearance. Essence and appearance. And when you understand that, then that's the humor. You will not be attaching, greatly grasping, because it's insubstantial. But yet, you're not, yet you respect relativity. You understand? So like in the Tonglen now, you see, I had one new idea about this, is that when you, because you realize how everything is in its true nature, illusory, dreamlike, that's why when you take on the suffering of others, or pain, or like suffering, illness, you're not afraid that, oh, if I take on, what's going to happen to me? First of all, you realize even me is not there. So that protects you. You said shunyata is the greatest protection. But then yet at the same time, then if it's not really true, if it's not just doesn't exist, is it just a kind of a game? No. But yet on a relative level, there does exist. There is karma, there is negative karma. So when you practice it, it purifies the ego. So there are two things.
So at the moment the light of your bodhicitta streams out to touch your friend in pain, it's essential to feel a firm conviction that all of their negative karma has been purified, and a deep lasting joy that they've been totally freed of their suffering and pain. Then as you go on breathing normally, in and out, continue steadily with this practice. If you feel at all hesitant and feel you don't yet have the strength or courage of compassion to do the practice of Tonglen wholeheartedly, don't worry. Just imagine yourself doing it, saying in your mind, as I breathe in, I'm taking on the suffering of others, and as I breathe out, I am giving them happiness and peace. Or do it in the form of a simple prayer, deeply aspiring to help beings. May I be able to take on the suffering of others. May I be able to give my well-being and happiness to them. If not now, then sometime in the future. What we visualize when we are doing this practice of giving and taking is not as important as the feeling that we experience.
Very good. So that concludes the seventh
verse.
Now the eighth
verse.
The last one.
And the main theme is remain pure and overcome attachment to illusory objects.
Remain pure and overcome attachment to illusory objects. May all this remain undefiled by the stains of 8 mundane concerns. May I, recognizing all things as illusion, devoid of clinging, be released from bondage. Another translation is, may they not be defiled by the concepts of 8 mundane concerns, and aware that all things are illusory, may they, ungrasping, be free from bondage.
I will learn to keep all these practices untainted by thoughts of the 8 worldly concerns. May I recognize all things as like illusions, and, without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. So the first part of the 8th verse is about being free from the 8 worldly concerns, which are essentially all about selfishness. This first part of this verse, along with the previous 7 verses, are concerned with the development of relative bodhicitta. The second part of this 8th verse is about the ultimate nature of reality.
Understanding the ultimate nature of reality.
About the lack of intrinsic
about understanding
existence.
The lack of intrinsic existence of things, which is called shunyata. So this is concerned with the development of absolute bodhicitta.
But in the first 2 lines of the 8th verse, as we become more free from the 8 worldly concerns, we are getting closer and closer anyway to the absolute bodhicitta, because we're getting closer and closer to to the realization of selflessness.
Now the first two lines, the Dalai Lama says,
The first two lines of this verse are critical for a genuine practitioner.
the key word is genuine practitioner, genuine practitioner.
They emphasize the need to ensure that our spiritual practice and training of the mind are not polluted by the 8 worldly concerns.
Because these 8 worldly concerns, what make your practice is, as some master call it, into spiritual materialism. If we are governed by these 8 worldly concerns,
And then whatever we do becomes spiritual materialism, a samsaric and dharma.
samsara, it may appear as spiritual, but actually is it's hypocritical, or rather, it's not pure, it's polluted.
When your actions are not stained by the 8 worldly concerns, the essence of which is hope and fear, then you are free of samsara. The 8 worldly concerns...
What are the 8 worldly concerns? They are...
hope for gain and fear of loss.
See, if you have hope for gain, fear of loss. That's why in this practice, you give the profit to others, take the loss upon yourself. So when you realize that, actually you overcome one of the main 8 worldly concerns. Hope for pleasure, fear of pain. Also it's the reverse, you take on the pain, all this, and you give your pleasure disting others. Hope for praise and fear for criticism. If someone criticizes you, accuses you, belittles you, you consider, that teaching in this, may I take upon the loss upon myself to give profit and gain to others. Yeah. That's it. Then hope for fame, fear for infamy. Instead of like the story of, for example, the Zen master. When he was accused, he was very known for his purity, but when he was accused, he was not concerned about his reputation. That's such a great example. Hope for fame, fear of infamy. Because you see, really at the end of the day, this is a sign of real maturity, spiritual maturity. When you really realize, when your actions, even your spiritual practice, not governed by such motivation for hope for gain, fear of loss, hope for pleasure, fear of pain, hope for praise, fear of criticism or blame, and hope for fame and fear of infamy. If you're not concerned about, if you're able to overcome that, then you become a genuine practitioner, a really genuine practitioner, true practitioner.
This is talking about the fact that we have to be sure that our motivation as practitioners is correct, that it is to act exclusively for the benefit of other beings. This should be our only reason for wanting to achieve the state of complete Buddhahood or omniscience. Now the second 2 lines of this verse. It's only as the Dalai Lama says
so
now...
Therefore, that really, like for example, the example of this hermit, when he threw a handful of ash to the offering, then he realized what he was doing was just governed by what worldly he was. So when he threw that really shows his, that pure offering.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, now the last 2 lines of the 8 verses for training the mind relate to the practice of cultivating what is known as absolute bodhicitta, which refers to the development of insight into the ultimate nature of reality. The last 2 lines of this verse stress the need to situate our practice and our training of the mind within a full understanding of ultimate truth or emptiness, shunyata. They state that we should develop the awareness that all things are illusory, and without grasping that we should free ourselves from bondage.
Bondage, from grasping.
It's interesting that when you look at the teachings on training the mind, here in the 8 verses of training the mind, the subject of the ultimate nature of things, shunyata, or emptiness, comes right at the end of the 8 verses in the second half of the 8th verse. This is because in this text, the order of the teaching is intended for practitioners, it is said, of medium or lesser faculties, in other words, average practitioners. Whereas other teachings, such as the famous 7 points of training the mind, which was put together by Geshe Chekawa, starts by teaching shunyata, or the ultimate nature, at the beginning. This is regarded as being destined for Bodhisattva trainees of sharper faculties.
This is very good.
So the last 2 lines, "May I recognize all things as like illusions, and without attachment gain freedom from bondage," refers to the absolute bodhicitta, or the ultimate nature. As soon as the Dalai Lama says, though things appear, they have no intrinsic existence, as in the 8 similes of an illusion.
Famous, the 8 similes are dream, like magic show, like visual,
aberration,
mirage, echo, city of
Gandharvas,
and reflection, that appear, and then city created by magic. So that there's a little explanation of each of these, okay?
Dream. All the external objects perceived within the 5 senses are not there, but they appear through delusion. In a magic show, things are made to appear by a temporary conjunction of causes, circumstances, and connections. In a visual aberration, things appear to be there, yet there's nothing. In a mirage, things appear, but they're not real. In an echo, things can be perceived, but there's nothing there, either outside or inside. In a city of Gandharvas, there is neither a dwelling nor anyone to dwell.
Yeah, I remember Dijun Rinpoche saying, it was many years ago in France, he was received by this family for Sunday lunch. There were some family friends, And so he sat and he was placed, as this family was not really Dharma family, it was just ordinary French family, so they gave it was a Dordogne. So, they put him, of course, in front of the television. That's the main living room. So he just, television was on. He just sat there, watched for 2 hours. Normally he doesn't watch television. 2 hours, and afterwards he rubbed his eyes. He says, oh, very good, he said. It's not so good for the eyes, but it's very good, he said. Normally we talk about illusion, but you can actually see it. There, you can really see it. Anyway, so then reflection.
In a reflection, things appear, but they have no reality of their own. And in a city created by magic, there are all sorts of appearances, but they're not really there. So when we do this practice, we are aware that the wish to help others, the one who has that wish, and the living beings for whom that wish is made are all actually without any intrinsic inherent existence.
That means you're not attached yourself, nor to your act, nor to the object, you see. You're free of subject, object, and activity. That's the most important. It's called mikpa mepa, referenceless. The free of the korsum, the subject, object, activity, are the cause of actually the samsara. You become free of that. Anyway,
Similarly, compassion itself, you yourself who are being compassionate, and those to whom you're giving your compassion are all again without any intrinsic, inherent, independent existence. You could say...
if you say in English kind of way, if you said that you have a very, very good sense of humor, you don't take it so seriously.
You could say that as long as these 3, the actor, that which is acted upon, and the action itself, are regarded as ultimately being existent and true, then we haven't understood their real true nature. Though they appear to exist inherently, in fact, they don't. And so that's why they are said to be like dreams or like illusions. So by gaining the wisdom that understands the emptiness of true existence, that is, through the wisdom of hearing, the wisdom of contemplation, and the wisdom of meditation, we can actually free ourselves from samsara. It is in relation to what is called these three circles or three spheres, the actor, what is acted upon, and the action, that we have to gain this understanding. And in this sense, you can say that these are the basis for purification. What has to be purified is the clinging to their true existence, and that which acts as the purifier is the understanding that they do all lack true, ultimate, inherent existence. Because it is our misconception of these things as being truly existing that traps us and ties us and binds us to samsaric existence.
So that really, there is a very moving passage in this one of the books about His Holiness, where it says, I think when he was asked very intimate, directly about his experience, his realization, I think on one occasion he shared very directly that, one day, because he had studied for many years, but one day, I think it was around 1960, I think, down that area, one day as he was reading this very famous text, or this text, you see, there appeared this says, I is merely a designation. I is merely a designation, because, and that, it really, that when he's only so that he just suddenly, it's like almost like an electric shock kind of thing. Not a bad electric shock, but suddenly Pakan to realize that everything is kind of illusory. We just call I, but there is no ultimate reality. It just changed. It was such a profound that it remained with him for many days. So that from then onwards, whatever he sees, he does not see them in a normally we see them as something real or something inherently existing, but you see this as merely a designation, merely an appearance, merely like a mirage, merely a magic show. Is that clear? When we refer to I in the context of the 8 verses, we should not see it as some form of objectively real or substantially existent self. We should always bear in mind that the self is understood as the conventional person here. The person, the self, the person or the agent must be understood purely in terms of how we experience our sense of self normally. See, we should not go beyond the level of conventional understanding of self and person. We should develop an understanding of our existence in terms of our bodily and mental existence, that so that the self and the person are in some sense understood as designations dependent upon mind and body. The Chandrakirti uses the example of the chariot in his guide to the middle way. When you subject the concept of chariot to analysis, you're never going to find some kind of a metaphysical or substantially real chariot that is independently of the parts that constitute the chariot, but this does not mean that the chariot does not exist. Like the cup also, if you just break the cup, really analyze, there is no cup, but that doesn't mean that the cup does not exist. Similarly, when we subject the self, the nature of self, to such analysis, we cannot find a self independent of the mind-body that constitute the existence of the individual or the being. This understanding of the self as independently originate being must also be extended to our understanding of other sentient beings also. Other sentient beings are once again designations that are dependent upon bodily and mental existence. Bodily and mental existence is based on the aggregates which are the psychophysical constituents of the being. The last 2 lines, that may I, recognizing all things as illusion, devoid of clinging, be released from bondage, or may they, ungrasping, be free from bondage. These lines actually point to the practice of cultivating insight into the nature of reality, but on the surface they seem to denote a way of relating to the world during the stage of post-meditation. In the Buddhist teaching on the ultimate nature of reality, 2 significant time periods are distinguished. One is the actual meditative session during which you remain in the single-pointed meditation on emptiness, you see. The other is the period subsequent to the meditative session when you engage actively in the real world, as it were. So here, these two lines directly concern the way of relating to the world in aftermath of one's meditation emptiness. This is why that text speaks of appreciating the illusion-like nature of reality, because this is the way one perceives things when one arises from the single-pointed meditation on emptiness. And particularly when insight dawns, this is my remark. Also in the Lojong, the 7 points of mind training, in the post-meditation, one should be a child of illusion, it says. You see, it's basically after meditation, you see, like after meditation, like a shamatha, calm abiding and cleansing, and when you have a more insight into the nature of reality, then you begin to see things as more illusory and dreamlike. And then, you actually maintain that awareness throughout. Okay? These lines make very important points, because sometimes people have the idea that what really matters is the single-pointed meditation on emptiness within the meditative session. They pay much less attention to how this experience should be applied in the post-meditation methods. However, I think the post-meditation period is very important. The whole point of meditation on the ultimate nature of reality is to ensure that you are not fooled by appearances, and that you appreciate the gap between how things appear to you and how they really are. Buddhism explains the appearance can often be deluding. With the deeper understanding of reality, you can go beyond the appearances and relate to the world in a much more appropriate, effective and realistic manner. I often give an example of how we should relate to our neighbors. Imagine you are living in a particular part of the town where interaction with your neighbor is almost impossible. Yet it is actually better if you do interact with them rather than ignore them. But to do so in the wisest way depends on how well you understand your neighbor's personality. If for example, the man living next door is very resourceful, then being friendly and communicating with him will be to your benefit. At the same time, if you know that deep down he can also be quite tricky, and that knowledge is also invaluable if you are to maintain a cordial relationship and be vigilant so that he does not take advantage of you. So likewise, once you have the deeper understanding of the nature of reality, then in the post-meditation, when you actually engage with the world, you will relate to the people and things in a much more appropriate and realistic manner. When in the text refers to viewing the phenomena as illusion, it is suggesting that the illusion-like nature of things can only be perceived if we have freed yourself from the attachment to phenomena as independent, discrete entities, you see. So once you have successfully freeing yourself from such attachment, the perception of the illusion-like nature of reality will automatically rise. Whenever things appear to you, although they appear to have an independent or objective existence, you will know as a result of your meditation that this is not really the case. You will be aware of things are not as substantial and solid as they seem. So the term illusion therefore points to the disparity between how you perceive things and how they really are.
So the last lines of this 8th verse express the wish for us to directly experience the nature of reality.
That's what His Holiness had, this very powerful experience of, you see. How everything is just merely a designation. I is merely a designation. Then you begin to realize the egolessness, you see. Then you become free from
bondage.
Then when you have that, you see, may recognize all things like illusion without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. So when you realize the illusion, then there is not so much attachment. Like, so for example, like movies, they're just illusion. But then of course, I think, unfortunately, we get also take very seriously and become very attached, then of course We identify with the heroes, and we know. Sometimes I feel that we can also accumulate negative karma by saying we want to kill the negative one. When somebody kills you, just you rejoice in that. I think that's also I think you should really look at them as just simply merely play. Unfortunately, they're made so real that a lot of people take them very seriously. A lot of young people, particularly people who are lost. Unfortunately, since there's no spiritual culture, no support, people follow whatever comes. Movies, and then kind of they take them real, and so therefore leads to violence. All these, unfortunately. So the last two lines of the 8th verse express the wish for us to directly experience the nature of reality. And because of the understanding of that, will free us from bondage. That means, when you realize the ultimate nature of things, then everything is more illusory, dreamlike. Therefore, there is no grasping enter into your perception, therefore free from the bondage. May their ungrasping be free from bondage. In fact, in the shamatha practice, to the shamatha with object, like watching the breath, further subject-object activity, that the breather breathe breath, but slowly they dissolve. You remain in the kind of that, just breathe, breath, dissolve into one. And you remain in the nowness. Then from nowness also you go beyond the nowness. Without being stuck in the nowness, you go beyond. From that into the vipassana, into the state of shunyata. As I mentioned to you, the vipassana, according to the Mahayana, particularly, for example, in the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen, it is really almost equivalent to nature mind. Because when you talk about the vipassana in the Theravada tradition, it's more based on shamatha. Of course it's vipassana also. But I think therefore I don't want to be confused. When you talk about vipassana in the Dzogchen, it's correct to nature mind. When you realize the shunyata, it's the wisdom that realizes egolessness. That is the vipassana. Is that you see, so the mind is freed of grasping. Remember, in the benefit of meditation, after a while, even the ego and grasping tendency dissolve. After a while, not only your mind settles, but dissolves. Like in the old example I used to give, I don't know how good it is. Like when you have a pencil, crayon, and you sharpen it. Okay? You sharpen it into a really fine point. When you sharpen it more and more, the point dissolves. The shamatha one-pointedness, you see, when you sharpen it more and more, it dissolves into the vipassana. You understand? So therefore there the subject-object activity all dissolve because you see the illusory nature of things. Or rather, put it this way, in meditation, because it's a kind of really, you have progressed through shamatha and mind has actually transcended and you become free of grasping, then what's incredible, even though you see it's very different, before thoughts and emotions, they bother you. That's why, you see, we try to practice mindfulness meditation, because thought and emotions are obstruction. Why? Because there's grasping, because there's distraction, all these things. Now when you overcome your mind, conquer your mind, you see, then the whole perception changes, the experience changes, and even the appearance changes. Even the appearance of thoughts and emotion changes. Remember earlier I said how when you conquer the mind, then you conquer your perception and experience. When you conquer your perception, even the experience, the appearance changes. No, even the circumstances. So that happens, you see. When changes, when you overcome your mind, then you experience, your emotions changes also, transforms. And then when you look at even the appearance of that changes, even though like emotions may rise, or whatever rises, there's no longer any grasping and into perception. A simple example. You know, you have these frying pans. We're coming to the basic cooking. Yeah, sometimes there are what is called non-stick pans. No. You see, your mind becomes non-stick. Thoughts come, they don't stick. Emotions come, not stick. That's non-stick. Because there's no grasping and perception. So it is through the experience of this, through the Vipassana, we can realize this. But also in the Vipassana, there is what preliminary Vipassana is the investigation into the nature of phenomena and come to realize the dreamlike. All phenomena are dreamlike, you see. Like in the 7 words of 7 points of mind training, absolute bodhicitta is like the first starts by all phenomena dreamlike. So the thing is that you see, you begin to realize for all the phenomena dreamlike. It's one thing that you can realize through examination. Through deep analysis, you realize illusory nature. Just as science, we realize before, like such things matter. We think the smallest thing matter is the atom. Even the atom doesn't exist. But then when you look into yourself also, examine. Where is I? Is I here? Here? In Buddhism there's a very, very deep investigation. When you do that, then all things you begin to be illusory, dreamlike. That means there's no attachment. Then when you realize that, you begin to see, they're illusory, they're not real. That doesn't mean that you will always be somebody a little bit, it's not real. No, not like that, like always little pain. No, it's like there's really a generosity. The real generosity comes from realization of Absolute. Called discovering the treasure of Dhammadhatu.
Ça s'appelle découvrir le trésor du Dharmadhatu.
And so that you see, through investigation you come to realize the illusory nature of things. Therefore, you see, free of the bondage, free of grasping. That's what it says. You see, it's like saying, may I recognize all things as illusion, without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. Because that's what binds you. So it is that from two ways we are attacking. Through realizing, through meditation, through shamatha vipassana, we realize that. And then through also investigation, through contemplation, lojong too. So therefore, we bring the two streams together. The teaching on the meditation and on the bodhicitta. And both of them, right at the ultimate nature, which is absolute bodhicitta, which is connected with the realization of the nature of mind, or which is same as saying realization of the inherent nature of things, which is called shunyata. So that last two lines of the 8th verse express the wish for us to directly experience the nature of reality. And because of the understanding of that, you see, will free us from bondage. And we will gain freedom from bondage. And finally result in the attainment of wisdom body, of fully enlightened body. That means, you see, in order to attain enlightenment, we need two accumulations. It's called merit and wisdom. So through the practice of relative bodhicitta, you accumulate the merit, which result in the what is called the body manifestation or the rupakaya. Whereas through the realization of absolute bodhicitta, you accumulate, as you call it, you result is the attainment of the wisdom body of the fully enlightened body, which is called Dharmakaya. In fact, these practice of relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta brings about the two accumulations of merit and wisdom also. So this is where
the two streams of meditation and bodhicitta come together. Both arrive at the ultimate nature, which is absolute bodhicitta, which is connected with the realization of the nature of mind, which is the same as saying the realization of the inherent nature of things, which is shunyata.
In fact, the teaching on shunyata, explanation of shunyata very simply, is you find in the Menga study pack. On the teaching of the ground, when you explain what shunyata is, I explained quite thoroughly in that, okay? So I think for the newer people who are interested in further, there are materials that they can study.
Gyabje Trungpa Rinpoche said,
Recently he said that in Larabling he said this, you see.
Originally, Geshe Tangpa's verses had slightly different endings. So this verse would have said, for example, train to recognize all things as like illusions, and without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. But later on, they were adapted into the form of an aspiration prayer. May I recognize, and so on. Since it's so very difficult to accomplish this instruction in a genuine way, we make the aspiration to do so by saying, may I be able to accomplish this and really put these 8 verses into practice. Geshe Chekawa says also that in addition to Geshe Tangpa's original 1-line headings to the 8 verses, there's a 9th line, recite prayers and aspirations. Geshe Chekawa suggests we pray like this: if you, my masters, the Buddhas of the 3 times, and all the Bodhisattvas possess blessings and compassion, if you, the 10 male and 10 female wrathful deities, possess power and might, and if you, the wisdom dakinis, possess strength and abilities, bless me so that I realize the meaning of these 8 verses. Bless me so that the sufferings of all sentient beings and its causes all ripens upon me, and that all the fruits of my bodhicitta ripen upon all beings.
It means all good things they receive, no?
Whatever virtuous actions such as lojong that we may perform, afterwards recite the aspiration prayer of the 8 verses. Such an aspiration creates propensities for bodhicitta.
And also it's very good to do the practices maybe very, how would you say, very practically. Just saying, let's do the first one on like Monday, the second one on Tuesday, you know, every day. Now the conclusion.
How to practice the 8 verses. There are different ways in which we can practice these verses. We can have the 8 verses as a daily practice to read through ourselves. Or some people take 1 verse for each day of the week. And because the 8th verse is largely about absolute bodhicitta or the ultimate nature, you can include it within each of the other 7. Some teachers say it can be helpful to single out the verse from the 8 verses which seems to be the most relevant to our present situation, that has particular resonance for you at the moment. So pick that one and then contemplate on it over and over again until you begin to feel the effect of it.
In fact, it could be that after you really master these teachings, come to know that, then may actual situations occur to you, that particular teaching from the 8 verses may respond to that, and then you practice it. You understand? You will begin to the right appropriate teachings, you will remember, and then you said practice it, will bring accomplishment.
And Gyabje Rinpoche said, when these 8 verses are done elaborately, we would spend 1 month on each verse. And so we train in the 8 verses for 8 months. When done not so elaborately, 21 days are spent on each verse. If you don't practice like this, the mind will not be trained.
So that concludes it very happily, okay?